outside Hart Square, and behind me is a Conrad Hildebran grist mill, which was built in 1760. Ironically, several years ago, somebody from the University of North Carolina history department asked me how I could document the mill to be 1760, and I really could only tell him that it was word of mouth. But probably a month later, a patient came to my office, brought a copy of the Hickory Daily Record in 1940, where it described this mill was partially damaged from the flood of that year, and the newspaper heading talked specifically about the wheel itself was probably mostly destroyed, but salvaged was the stones, the cranes, the drive shaft, the rind, the damsel, and many of the hand-forged levers. The mill itself was moved to Hart Square in 1983. It was located on the Miller's Creek near Icard, some 3.5 miles from Icard and 15 miles from Hart Square. It was purchased from Richard Bradshaw, and it was called the Miller's Mill originally, then Smith Mill, then Hicks and Bradshaw for Richard Bradshaw, and later became the Bradshaw Mill. The mill itself operated until 1957. The stones themselves weighed probably close to 2,000 pounds. They were sent from France to Charleston and from Charleston here by wagon. Reconstruction took over 2 years of the mill. Some of the logs that you see here came from a mill very close to here that was off by the Robinson Road in Hickory. The only way to get these stones into the mill from here, which we're below the road, was to take 4x6s and make kind of like a rail all the way to the bottom, all the way inside it, and to the left. And by using wooden rollers, we were able to take come-alongs to slow it down coming down the hill and pull it up and put it in place. The entire project took over a day to put these stones into place. An interesting story about this particular location where we're standing is Harold Starnes in his 80s and I moved to the tinsmith shop on a trailer right at the road here, and this is where I took the nail out of a piece of tin I was sitting on, and I came off that roof like 90 miles an hour. I missed this big oak tree here and I landed right at the foot of the grist mill. That was before all these rails were put up, and I was still sitting on the piece of tin in the leaves that I hadn't gotten up, and Harold looked up over his shoulder and said, "Doc, how in the world did you get over there?" During the festival we actually run this particular mill. It's the only time it's run throughout the year. We'll grind corn here into grits in one case and cornmeal in another, and it's for sale right here where I'm standing during the festival. Now as we come into the mill, Robin Moretz, who is an actual millwright, will discuss the operations of this particular grist mill.
Hello, my name is Robin Moretz and I'm the miller here at Hart Square. This mill is typical of what early mills in North Carolina, Appalachia were. Very small, generally ran by one person, so the miller would be doing everything. And you had mills on streams all over because transportation did not allow for people to, take a day out of their work on the farm to travel long distances. So these local mills were very important. They not only were a place to have your grain ground for your own use, but you could sell grain to the miller. They were a place that people gathered, particularly on Saturdays, because it became like a social center. So mills of this nature were extremely important to the development of this part of our state. The mill itself is run by water. You have a mill pond here. You have a flume bringing the water down to the mill, and then you have a gate on the flume that allows the water to be controlled going into the water wheel. In a mill of this nature, the three important things that you've got to take into consideration when you're grinding grain is the amount of water coming into the mill, the amount of gap in between the two stones, and the amount of grain you're putting into the stones. And it's a fine balance of working so that you get the end product that you want. Now, when you first turn on the water wheel, to get it to go forward, you have to load the water wheel because there's no water in the buckets already. So by opening the gate, I can start the water wheel up and thus give me power to the mill. There's no brake on a water wheel, so the only way you can stop a water wheel is cut the water off. So as you're milling, if an emergency came up, if something broke and you had to stop it very quickly, it actually takes a while for the water wheel to stop turning. It does not know that you're supposed to be stopping immediately. It's just going to keep going from the weight of the water driving the water wheel around. And it's actually the weight of the water that makes the water wheel turn as the water fills into the buckets, and not the water flowing across the top of the water wheel. You've got three different types of mechanisms for running a water-powered mill. This is an overshot water wheel, which means the water's entering at the top. You can have an undershot water wheel, which does use the flow of the stream to make the water go by turning the water wheel backwards. Or you can have what is called a turbine mill, where you've got the water falling by distance down into a pit, and you have a turbine in the bottom of it making the water wheel turn. Turn off the mill, it's just the same as you turned it on. Turn it back the other way. And it will slowly come to a stop. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how the millstones actually work themselves. A mill of this is simple technology that allowed a local person to be able to have a mill, and it allowed most mills to be operated by just one person. Here's how a mill works. You've got the power coming in from the water wheel, and it comes over and transfers that from a horizontal movement to a vertical movement. You have coming up from the basement of the mill a rod that the top stone is going to set on. Now the top stone is actually the one that turns. The bottom stone is stationary, it's called the bed stone, and the top stone is called the runner stone. But that top stone is very important for it to be balanced. The point at which that stone is balanced, you have a U-shaped piece of metal in it, and you have a little cut bearing at the top, on top of the bottom shaft, and that point is called the cockeye. If a millstone was out of balance, then it would be called a cockeyed millstone. And we still use that term today to mean something that is unbalanced or crooked. Now, as the shaft is coming up, you'll notice that you have a wooden piece up here on top. And this is called the stone furniture. You have a hopper on top, and in the hopper you have a wooden piece that's called the measuring stick. Then you have a wooden piece that's horizontal called the shoe. Now what happens is, the ribs here on the damsel rod, the piece coming up out of the runner stone, causes the shoe to shake back and forth. As the shoe is shaking back and forth, the grain is going to come down out of the hopper into the shoe. Now the way to control the amount of grain coming in is the measuring stick. Very simple technology. You just take the stick, slide it in and out, and it allows more or less corn to come in. Now once the grain is starting to come in and you have the grinding taking place, you're adjusting the balance between the gap between the stone, the amount of water coming in, and the amount of grain coming in. And you're looking for a particular particle size in what's coming out. Now you'll have small and large, and that would give you in the today's verbiage would be the flour or the meal. And you can have corn flour, you can have wheat flour, and you can have cornmeal. And cornmeal just has a little bit larger particle size. Now you can also have grits, which is even a larger particle size that you would sift out and take the corn flour out. Now, as it's starting to come in, you have a wooden case around the stones, and as it's coming down through the stones, centrifugal force is going to push it out between the two stones. Now the stones have a set of furrows and landings. The furrows are the grooves in them, and the landings are the high place. And what you need to imagine is, as it's coming in and going out, it gets drug across the high place, falls into the next furrow, comes out, gets ground a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more as it passes through. And when it comes out, it's going to build up in the stone case. And as that builds up, the stone turning will pull it around to a chute where it'll come out here into the sifter. Now, not all millers were honest back in the day, and some millers would take and make the gap between the stone and the case here wide enough so that once a person came in, had their grain ground, and a lot of times what people were doing was they would come in, the miller would take out a portion of grain to be paid with so that no cash passed hands. They would grind the product, it would come out, and the farmer would take it back with him all that was coming out. Some millers would make that gap up there big so that when the person left with their product, they'd come out and spout down here, and they would take and raise the stone furniture, scoop that cornmeal out. Next person coming in, they would do the same thing. And they were actually getting extra amount of product that wasn't going home. So they actually passed a law that said a stone case could be no more than 1 inch wider than the millstones itself. Now these millstones are granite. You have some stones that are made out of quartz. This is a local stone. The quartz stones would come from France, and they're called French burr stones. You see them occasionally in some mills, and a good way to tell if it's a French burr stone is if you see a metal band around it, then it's a French burr stone. If it has no band around it, it's most likely a granite stone. Now, let me explain a little bit about how a miller could get the stones moved from one place to another. Because what you have is, after a while you have to take the stones apart and clean them. The oil from the grain builds up on the stones, making them slick, and they do wear some, but remember, the stones are not turning against each other. There's that minute gap in between the two stones where the grinding takes place. But to move the stones, you have the device over here that's called a stone crane. Now the stone crane will pivot around, and you have a set of hooks that come down, and you would hook to two spots in the middle of the millstone with metal pins, and then you would start turning. Now, you think, you can't turn that enough to get it up, but just think of the same way that the Egyptians got the stones to the top of the pyramids. You're taking it a little bit at a time. That groove in the stone crane hooks allows you to pick it up. And as the millstone starts coming up, the miller just flips it over, and as it gets up off there completely, he flips it back over, sets it back down, and he works on it. Now, when they're making cornmeal, it was very important to pay attention to what was going on in the mill. And not all the time could a miller be watching what was going on. You also use your other senses of your hearing and your sense of smell. You've heard the term, keep your nose to the grindstone. That's an old milling term that meant that the miller should not put his nose on the stone, but should smell to make sure that the stones are not heating up, because the flour of the mill would catch on fire if it got too hot. Now, another thing is when the product is coming out, the miller would take and get some of it and hold it between his thumb and fingers and feel it to see if it's the right particle. And the term rule of thumb comes from that. You've also got in the milling industry, when the product is coming out, like I said before, it can come out in different particle size, and you would have a fair product, a middling product, and a fine product. So if you were fair to middling, you were from worse to just a little bit better. So we still use a lot of these things that we might not know come from the milling industry in our general lives today. When it comes time to sharpen a set of stones, or to go in and clean them and get the grooves redefined, now they would hire an itinerant millstone dresser. That would be someone who would go from mill to mill just dressing stones. Most of the millers didn't have that talent themselves, so they would hire someone. They used a hammer as such. What they would do is they'd lay down on the millstone, and they a lot of times would take a device and put on top of it and pin it down through the top hole, and they would take it and spin it around, and they would put chalk or charcoal on the bottom of it, and that would show the high and low places on the stone. Now, with the hammer, they would just take and just chip away at that stone. Remember, they're very hard, so it would take time, but as they would do it in their hands, flakes of the metal off the hammer would go in, and also from the stone. So a lot of times when a miller would look at a stone dresser, he would look to see, when he shook hands, how much stain he had on his hands. And in doing so, he would be looking at that, they would be showing their metal. So they would know if the stains were there, they had experience. If not, then they had somebody they probably would not want to hire. This is one of the oldest examples of mills in North Carolina. Each year at the festival, if you come out, we are going to be running the mill. When settlers were moving west into the mountain areas of North Carolina and Piedmont, they were transitioning from using wheat for flour to using corn for cornmeal. And here's the importance in the difference. Wheat was a grain that had been grown for years and is used for making white bread, biscuits, this type of thing. But it was hard for a farmer running a small farm to have the equipment and whatnot and the time to raise wheat and bring it to harvest and then make a lot of flour for the winter. Corn, on the other hand, could be grown easily. It could be picked by hand, it could be shelled by hand, and it could be brought to the mill in a burlap sack, and they could make the cornmeal for you, and you could take it home, and then you could use it for such things as cornbread. That's why you have such an abundance of people in the southern mountains who eat cornbread today instead, or corn cakes, hoe cakes, instead of eating biscuits for their meals. A lot of times the mother would get up in the morning, sticks a cake of cornbread, and they would eat it at breakfast, they would eat it at lunch, and they may eat it at supper. So corn was a very good substitute for carbohydrates for people in this area that didn't have vast amounts of equipment to harvest wheat. With the millstone, you have different patterns, but what's consistent with all of them is you have a high place that's flat here. It's called the landings, and that's actually where the grain is ground as the two stones pass over each other. And then you have the furrows. The furrows is where, after it's ground, it's going to fall in, and because of centrifugal force, it actually is going to bring it out from the center to the outside. But as it's big enough, it'll grind it again and again until it passes through and becomes the size that you would like the particle size to be. Some stones you'll see they just run radiant out straight. You have some that are in a curved pattern, but it was all up to the miller and what the miller thought was the best way to dress the stones. So as you go out in your travels, you'll see a lot of different stones, and they're not all going to be alike, but they all have one thing in common. They have furrows and they have landings, because the furrows is what transfers the product through, the landings is where it's ground, in between the two stones.
As water comes off the water wheel, it runs the glazing mill, which grinds the glass for making the slip for pottery. It dumps water into this little wooden bucket like, and as it dumps the water out, there's a metal counterbalance on the opposite end. It brings it back up, and when it fills back again, at the counter end of it is a metal pounder, and it pounds the glass. As the water dumps, it brings back and pounds the glass on each time it's emptied, grinding up the glass to a fine glass product that they can use in the glazing. And also we use the same water to carry down in a pipe to run the liquor still for keeping it cool at all times when they're making liquor.